Evening, everybody. Welcome to our work session for Tuesday, March 3rd. First item on our agenda is the Automated Vehicle Identification System implementation. We'll turn it over to staff.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Randy Darlin, Chief of Police for the City of Evans. As we jump into this, as we move through the first part of this, it's kind of repeat information from the last time. So I'll kind of move through that part quickly, and then we'll get into the pieces that are are new to the presentation and kind of new to based on information that was learned from our last meeting. So focus is just to provide council with key insights and implementation of the automatic vehicle identification system, which is basically managed under Colorado statute. 42.4.110.5 governs the use. It's pretty substantial statute. I included it in the packet, many pages. Really goes over all of the different parameters by which you've got to operate within the system, and provides a very fixed set of penalties for it. Penalties are to the registered owner of the vehicle. It is a civil, not criminal penalty, and does not incur points on a vehicle operator's license. All right, so this is an entirely civil process. And I'll caveat that as long as the violation is not over 25 miles an hour. Right? Then we pull it out of the civil process and we move it to a criminal process, which really is not encompassed by this system. So I'll have questions. If you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer them, but really isn't covered by this system specifically. The legal requirements, right? We have to adopt an ordinance as a city. The city municipality has to adopt an ordinance that specifically relates to AVIS technology. We have to post signs within 300 feet of any AVIS system that's being utilized within the city. And we have to use notification and coordination with the Department of Transportation for any state highway. If it's a local road, we can control that through our ordinance. If it's a state highway, we've got to collaborate and coordinate with CDOT on that to make sure that we're compliant and collaborative with the state. Not a difficult process, but it obviously will be more permitting if we were to put a fixed location on like US 85, for example, right? As we move through this, there are additional legal requirements. A public announcement, so the city would have to post for 30 days on a website prior to the use of any type of AVIS technologies. We'd have to provide a 30-day warning period where we were not issuing citations, but we could issue warnings during that period. But from the date of that warning cycle till the period in which we could actually initiate any citations within the system, there needs to be a 30-day period of window for just warnings. Designated automatic vehicle identification corridors, which this is probably the biggest piece of the legislation that would need to be passed at the municipal level, right? So the way the system works is you can designate corridors. You can use it in residential areas. You can use it near parks. You can use it in maintenance areas when you're doing road work. But the corridors are the areas that are very specific to the ordinance. If we were to pass an ordinance in the city, those corridors would have to be designated, and then you can use automated vehicle identification systems within those corridors. There has to be some correlation to speed, complaints, traffic crashes. So some data to support that, hey, this is an area that, we would want to use this type of a system in. And then you would identify those locations throughout the city, and you can use the systems within those locations. You can use a fixed system or a mobile system. It's not relevant as to which you use, but if you're going to use it outside of, and I'll flip to the next section here, school zones, maintenance, construction areas, streets bordering municipal parks, residential neighborhoods, as defined by any block with a majority of improvements along both sides of the street that have residential dwellings and the speed limits at 35 or lower. Or those, again, designed AVIS corridors established by local ordinance or resolution, right? And for those, you really specifically under the ordinance, under the statute at the state level, need to provide some level of data, crash data, speed complaint data. We got plenty of all that in the city of Evans in our high trafficked areas, right, where maybe AVIS would be most applicable and have the biggest bang on public safety, right? And then again, state highways after coordinating with the Department of Transportation. Some of our key considerations. Community impact, right? We will have some level of community impact on this. You can look at other communities that have done this throughout the Colorado area, and there's been, some level of pushback, complaint, some level of appreciation. So it's both sides of the coin, but some community members are happy to see reduction in speed. Some community members, feel like maybe it's a little bit of an overreach, right? Legal and policy framework, that's part of that ordinance process. That's part of what we need to do as a city, what you would need to do as a council to determine what that ordinance looks like, and then, put it through the standard ordinance process and pass something that was applicable specifically to Evans. The technology infrastructure is the camera, the placement, which vendor we use, and the cost of funding the program is basically paid for by the program. The program will pay for itself over time, and I'll kind of show you that as we move through this presentation. It's not a lot of citations that need to be issued on a monthly basis to cover the cost of the system. As we move through monthly system cost, a fixed speed system with the vendor that we put out an RFP, right? And we had 2 vendors come back. That's all we had kind of bid for the process in Evans. Those 2 vendors put forth proposals. We as a leadership team identified those proposals, went through and evaluated those proposals, and then selected one vendor as, the program that would probably best fit our city, right? Within that vendor, the fixed speeds system cost is $1,500 per system per month. And when I say per system per month, that is a fixed camera in a specific direction at a fixed location, right? If we were to use a mobile camera, it's also $1,500, but it would be mobile, be on a trailer. We could set it up at different locations, little different parameters under which we'd operate it, but $1,500 per month per system, one direction of travel, one fixed location, right? So 2 systems, $3,000. That's kind of what we based all of the data and the numbers off of as we go through this, you'll see. Includes equipment installation, maintenance, and processing platform. So it includes the software by which we'd use to identify violators, to notify violators, to manage it all the way through the court system, all the way through collection. This is the same analysis I used last time. I want it to be consistent, right? We don't have full-on speed studies. We've never done that here for this particular purpose. We've done it for different purposes in the city, but for this purpose, we didn't use this. But I did put my trailers out there, right, for a period of time back when we initially started this process. And this is the same data we used, right? So speed limit was 35 miles an hour. It was in the southbound 3500 block of 35th Avenue. Total vehicle count over 14 days was a little over 100,000 vehicles. Again, the 85th percentile was about 41.1 miles. So 85 out of every 100 vehicles are traveling at or below 41.1 miles per hour. So we're not far off the speed limit. It's not ideal. We want to bring that down some, but that's, relatively average for a normal 85th percentile, is being somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. 85 miles an hour, 85% of your vehicles are at or below that, right? When you look at excessive speeding, you can see 46 to 50, which is the target of Avis technology, right? The statute under state law, you can't cite unless it's 10 miles an hour or over. So if somebody is traveling 9 miles an hour, 8, 7, 6, they're not going to get one of these Avis violations. They have to be traveling at 10 or more miles an hour over the speed limit. So it's excessive speeding, right? So 1,300 vehicles out of that 14-day cycle, 287 were traveling 51 to 55, 56 to 60 were 69 vehicles, and anything at that 60 mark, that's going to be our threshold where it needs to be criminal. So anything above that, those 34 vehicles, we would have to identify and personally serve those individuals in order to hold them accountable, and we'd pull them out of the Avis system and into the criminal system. Makes it a little more difficult to actually prove, because now I got to prove who the driver was. It's just the way it works, right? So if it's going to be criminal, it's no longer civil. I can't write the citation to the owner of the registered vehicle. I can have a conversation with the registered owner. I can see if they'll give me the information on who is driving. I can do those things. But in order to hold them criminally liable, I have to know who the driver was. They do have technology that can be added to this technology to capture a picture of the camera of the driver. So that's additional technology that could be additionally added to the system so it could be more usable, and then we could use that in that criminal prosecution as well, right? So when we look at that, those totals, the statutory fine per violation, $40. That is the state statute. That is the maximum statute, right? Unless you can double it if you're in a school zone or if you're in a work zone. So you can go up to $80 if it's in one of those two zones, right? But any other violation tied to this, whether it's 10 miles an hour, 11, all the way up to 24, it's $40 fine, register and owner of the vehicle, civil fine, right? So when you look at the vendor processing cost, $10 is about the citation costs that they have in their presentation to us, right? So in their proposal, it's a $10 fee. For pre-violation processing, it's $7.50. For post-violation processing, it's $2.50. The net available to the city per citation is roughly $30. The statute, under state statute, does not allow it to be a per citation cost, so they have to break out their fees into what they're doing, like what are they physically doing in order to collect those fees. So they've broken it into two places: pre-violation processing, which is that photograph and, you know, running the license plate and determining all that. Post-violation is mailing and doing a check on who the registered owner of the vehicle is and all the pieces that go with that, all the way up to mailing out the violation and the collection process. Net available to city, $30. 2 mailed notifications are included in the vendor pricing. A third is an optional, but that would cost additional money. So if we chose to send a third before collection, that would be additional cost, right? Model excludes rare third notice cost, right? So just in case we wanted to do that, it would be an additional cost. Net per citation to the city, $30. Monthly fixed cost, $3,000. Break-even volume, it's about 100 citations per month. And at an 80% collection rate, it's 125 citations a month, right? And that's a pretty conservative estimate as we move through. I'll kind of show you how that broke down, right? So when you look at the observed high-risk speed events, that's 46 and over, so you're talking about that 10, 11, and beyond. We have 1,746 in 14 days. That's a daily average of about 125 across the month, about 45,000 vehicles on an annual basis. When you conservatively apply these filters, so let's say there's a 25% reduction for legal engineering thresholds. What does that mean, right? That means there's snow on the plate, couldn't read it. Plate doesn't match the car that goes through the intersection. Make, model doesn't come back to that registered plate. You can't read a digit. It's nighttime and it gets a blurry vision. It's changing lanes and the system can't exactly identify which car was which, right? So there could be a number of different pieces there but 25% reduction in that 45,000 cars. 75% approval rate means it comes to us, we go through and we determine, yep, I have a clearly identified car. It is that make, it is that model, it is that color. That is the registered owner of that make, that model, that color, that license plate. Now the police go through and approve those citations, so 75% of total. A 70% collection rate, which is very low considering the company's 85% kind of threshold. That's kind of about what they collect, about 85%. Estimated paid citations of $1,500 per month in year one, and I broke this down across 3 years so that we could look at what we hope to see happen as far as the public safety side of this is concerned. You look at those numbers, 125 vehicles a day, monthly average of those vehicles. Again, that speed limit of 35 miles an hour, which would be the target locations we used, unless we used 85, where the speed limits there are 45 miles an hour. Thresholds don't change, still has to be 10 above, right? But your legal engineering and screening, your police approval rate brings those paid citations down to about $1,477 a month at a 70% clip. I think we probably see a little higher than that, somewhere between 70 and 85. And then you look at what that means over year one, 1,500 citations a month. Over year two, if we saw a 35% reduction because of behavioral changes, people learn pattern, don't drive that direction, do everything they can to avoid AVIS technology. I think that's probably pretty conservative, 975 tickets a month. And then year three, we'd reduce that a little bit further down to about 750. That's definitely public safety improvement. We're cutting those vehicles almost in half, right, for speeding, high risk speeding, which it definitely is a public safety improvement for the community. When you look at that in consideration of the fines, $30 fine, you're looking at a potential net to the city of about $42,000 per month in year one, $26,250 in year two. And again, these are all basically applying the filters I gave you earlier, right? Reducing those numbers over time based on behavioral changes of the drivers, down to about $19,500 per month in year three, which would be a pretty significant reduction over that time for speeding within the community, right? When you look at that, and when I calculate these, I'm really operating off of one camera. We would have a second that would be, potentially anyway, we could have a second that would be mobile, and that would be used more in your residential neighborhoods, near your parks, near where we have complaints for speeding from residential community members, and it would be moved routinely. It's a little bit more time consuming right now. I need officer involvement, right? I need officers to put the signs up or put the trailer out there. They have to post signs. Those signs are temporary, right? They can be posted, but they have the 300 feet. There's all of those different factors that come into play with that. So there's more involvement and more resources necessary. But the plus side to that is there's additional traffic enforcement, and then there is the piece where we're utilizing it in areas that are going to be much more impactful from the complaint side of traffic enforcement in our residential communities, more so than our arterial roads that have a higher volume of traffic. So when you look at that, you see the declination of monthly revenue, and you see a safety success indicator that we're reducing the number of speeders through the community. Those are the year annual revenue projections based on those monthly net incomes. A little over $500,000, $500,000 in annual year one, down to $351,000, down to $270,000 in year three. One camera, one direction, one location. Again, conservative safety impact cost recovery projection. When I looked at this is really targeting only 1.6% of traffic violators in our busiest corridors, right? So it's not a big burden on the community when you're talking about 1.6. It's our most heavy speeders in the community, and that's that number that are traveling. High risk speed is 10 miles an hour or over. So the enforcement volume declines over time. That's a plus to the community. That's a safety factor for sure. Program remains cost covered at a very low citation level, so there's not a ton of risk. And then revenue drops over years, which gives us that proof of deterrence, gives us that public safety piece, and that's what we're looking for in the piece. And then the revenue, of course, can be used for other public safety initiatives within the community. The mobile AVI system, right? That was it's transportable. It's focused mainly on a vehicle trailer, improve traffic safety, reduce speeding and lowering and accident risks in pedestrian areas, especially when we have protected pedestrian areas. Data-driven decision-making, so we can utilize that based on complaints. We can utilize it based on the numbers we're getting from the traffic control devices we do have out there, our trailers and other data collecting devices. It's a cost-effective solution. We don't have a lot of officer overload, not a lot of workload for the officers, and that resource can be allocated elsewhere, right? You can give me 10,000 officers and I can't cover a spot 24/7, 365, right? You just can't do it. So, well, maybe with 10,000 officers, but let's be realistic. The bottom line is, you just can't put officers 24/7 anywhere. So, supports public awareness campaigns, reinforces safe driving messages, and it focuses that through the automated enforcement and not through daily contact with law enforcement. When you look at what the vendor provides, and all the vendors provide most of this information, but the vendor we chose does have AI-based incident processing with human verification, so they're using humans to verify those license plates and that it's a good violation. Software platform designed for user-friendly law enforcement review. We've gone through a couple of presentations with that team, giving us, showing us the software firsthand. Like any software, there's a learning curve for sure, but they'll do a full training process on that. The payment portal with customizable options for bilingual messaging and multiple payment options, so they can pay and they can speak another language if necessary. They can choose their language through the system. Financial systems for tracking inquiries and audits, so fully trackable and auditable software process. Mobile court interface with downloadable photo evidence and real-time adjudication options, so we can use the system to kind of create the file by which the prosecution would occur if there were a appeal or a court hearing requested, right? Communication development and support, so they'll help us speak to our community about it. They'll help us, print materials so that we can, push information out to the community. Media relations assistance on that same social media platforms and whatnot. An FAQ development and response for questions that we have from the community regarding the system and our implementation of it. Public-facing web content, and then the full court system is what we currently use. We're not going to integrate it based on our initial processes. I think we can do it without integrating. It can be completely sustained in and of itself, and we probably would want it to be completely separate, just for auditing and every other purpose that we have. Potential positive outcomes, right? Enhanced traffic safety. This is the same stuff I let you know last time, right? Reduce speeding, accidents, and pedestrian injuries. Efficient law enforcement frees up our officers to do other duties within the community, data-driven decision-making. Revenue generation. The fines can support other public safety initiatives throughout the community. And then 24/7 monitoring, which unfortunately there's nothing we can do to have that level of monitoring at any one location within our community. Some of the negative outcomes, right? Public perception issues. Some view this as a revenue tool rather than a safety measure. I think I did a lot to dispel that when I'm looking at only 1.6% of the violators on the data we have are really the target of AVIS citations. So it's not a big percentage of our community that's moving through the community recklessly, and it's targeting just that piece of, just that portion of the community that is. Privacy concerns, big issue, right? We know about that right now with it is a read of the plate, right? It's a different data system than Flock or any of that, so it's not used in the same way that Flock is. But there's still those privacy concerns, and that'll be something I'm sure some community members will be concerned about. Legal and compliance challenges, that's that legislative effort that the council would have to make in order to make sure we have a good, solid ordinance that is clear, easy understandable, and enforceable. And then the cost of the implementation is really our contract obligations, which we'll be working through them. If the council directs us to continue to move forward on this process, we'll be working with them on what that contract obligation looks like. And I basically gave you the cost of it associated with the process, but then there's terms and all the other pieces that we'll have to work through. And then there's always the potential for errors, right? We'll have some level of misidentification or improper ticketing, but that is what the hearing process is for and what the adjudication process is in the court. I threw a lot of information at you, but our next steps, and I left a couple things off here that I'll talk about, right? That's the legislative action. I've talked about that a bunch. Technical planning. That's really those speed studies, like determining what's the best location for this, right? Based on traffic volume, based on our speeds, where does this need to go within the community? Contracting, executing that contract with our chosen provider, and then that infrastructure and development and deployment. It's install necessary signage infrastructure. I think we can do that on the inside, in-house stuff with our sign shop and identifying where that needs to be. Deploy cameras, that's their role, right? They maintain and completely utilize, install, manage, maintain the cameras. We don't have to do any of that. However, there is definitely some in-house stuff, and I put it in the memo, not so much the PowerPoint, but there's some in-house stuff that we definitely have to do, and that's creating the entire process by which this will run, right? Well, down to, we get somebody that walks into the front desk and says, hey, I got to pay this, or how do I pay this, or what do I do with this, or, what happened here, right? All the way through hearings and court adjudication, right? Because most of the communities that set this up, they set up a 2-hearing process. The first hearing sometimes is with the PD, sometimes it's with a separate hearing officer, and then if that isn't settled enough, then it can be taken to a judicial process by which our judge can handle that, or a different hearing officer. It can be done in a myriad of ways, but those are some of the details that we would want to work out before we implement the process, and not trying to chase our tail after it's all said and done. So in this process, we included all of our stakeholders. I had many of our leadership team on those presentations by the company to include our court personnel so that they could see what this looks like and how does it interface with them. And because there is definitely going to be some impact to staff. There'll be some impact on the PD side because we've got to approve the citations before they're moved through for issuance. And then there's definitely some court processes that will come. It's a small number. I want to say 5,000 citations in Longmont, and they had 14 hearings. So there's some number, right? And what that number looks like month over month over month over month, we won't know until we're kind of in it. So we need to make sure that that process is kind of identified ahead of time and part of what we're doing rather than chasing that after the fact. And that's about it. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Really appreciate the great presentation. Just a couple things for you real quick. I know Greeley's been utilizing this for at least, the last 6 to 9 months? I know they've
Greeley's using a version. They don't have any fixed cameras. They're using vans, mobile vehicles.
Have they reported or have they shared any information with us about if that's improved any of the behavior? Have they seen reductions in speed with that being used?
So they've definitely had the vehicles out in operation on a day-to-day basis in Greeley. I focused more with Longmont because they were using the exact technology that we were using, and they're using the same company, same vendor. That they've been very happy with the outcome. They've only had it for a few months, and roughly we were looking at my biggest question for them was specifically whether or not what was the workload pulled into the PD and what was the workload pulled into the city staff with the result of the cameras being out there, right? And the information was basically that it was some, but not nominal. Not a ton of extra resources, but even Longmont, they're using their police department for the hearings, so they're bringing in officers off duty to manage that hearing cost, and that's going to cut into some of the revenue, right? Court staff, we think we'd probably need additional staff in the courts in order to manage this, so that's going to cut into that revenue number as well. But the system should pay for itself in abundance. Greeley's been using them for at least 8 months. I don't have any data, I'm sorry, Mayor, on like this specific number of reductions over that time frame. And I'm sure they may be able to provide that data, so I can try to get it and bring it back to you.
I'd be curious because I see them all over the place in Greeley, and I know they're using that mobile one, and I know it's probably making some impacts because I've driven up and down 34 and some of the other streets that they've used, and I've seen a lot of people. They're going fast and they're all hitting their brakes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really at least getting people alerted. Hey, I better slow down. So I was just kind of curious to see if it's had any. I know I had a conversation the other day with a resident on Sienna, and they've only lived in Evans for a few months, and really great conversation. And she really was concerned about the speed in her area. That was their biggest complaint. It's like, we have all these nice parks. There's a lot of kids. The speeding. And I think this is a great tool. It's not a revenue generator. We're not looking at we're looking to slow people down and make sure that the public is safe, especially in our area when we get lots of complaints about it. I know about people say the privacy concerns. There's no expectation of privacy in public. I don't know why people believe there is, but I know there isn't. But I think this is a great idea. I would look forward to hopefully getting this into Evans and trying to help a lot of those residents that have been really complaining and about the speed and get that hopefully behavior change for them.
One of the things with the behavior change is going to be the mobile locations, because they're mobile, you'll have an immediate behavioral change. You'll see slowing down when they see the trailers or when they see the signage that's out there posted up, right? but you're moving them on a regular basis, so you don't get the same behavioral change you're going to get for a fixed location. A fixed location, you're going to start to see people avoid the area. You're going to start to see just people slow down because they know it's always there 24/7, 365. I think we'll see a lot more behavioral change if we decide on a fixed location, and the mobile locations is going to be much more of a tactical tool for complaints and other concerns in and around our parks, residential areas, and our, some maintenance locations when we're doing maintenance in the location. So, the fixed location, I do think, and I think that the data will support pretty quickly that we are seeing a behavioral change in those areas.
Councilmember Delaney. Thank you, Chief.
Good evening, Chief. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick couple questions. I believe, it was not you, but I believe when we first started talking about this, we were told that after the first violation, you can get tickets for 5 and up. So the first threshold is 10, and once you've been issued a NAVIS violation, it drops down to 5. Is that a true statement?
That's accurate. It doesn't statutorily give any specific speed by which you can issue the citation, but it does clearly say that the first violation cannot be issued for less than 10 miles an hour or over. After that, it's just silent on the matter. So you could essentially, the second time there's a violation, you could issue a violation for 5 miles or 6 or 8 or whatever the case may be, as long as it was technically in violation of the speed limit. I think that's an implementation strategy. I think that's probably something we would want to look at with regard to how do we want to enforce that. Because we can be very strict and say, nope, we're only going to issue citations when they're in that 1.6% range, at the 10 miles an hour. Or, maybe it's that for a period of time, and then if you've got 3 or more, we're going to start, because it's tracking all that. Then we're going to go ahead and issue at, 6 or 8 miles an hour over the speed limit, or whatever threshold we decide, right? But the statute's kind of silent on it, but it does authorize violations after the first, which must be post 10 or above.
Okay, thank you. And then my only other question is, if we get a mobile trailer, does the 30 days of either no tickets or warnings start every time you move it?
So the short answer is we don't think so. We think that the statute says it's a 30-day warning that needs to be posted and put out there, right? The other piece to that is the way that I would like to see it implemented if we utilized it would be that we would identify our corridors throughout the city, and we would sign all of those corridors immediately, right? So that 30-day would start to run from the day one of our 30-day notice to the general public that we're going to do this, right? And that's our warning. It's silent as to saying, oh, every time you move it, you need to do this, or every time it doesn't clarify that. And the research I've done in a prior role I had was that it wasn't necessary every time you moved it, but that if you didn't sign a location that was a corridor, you would end up having to put that warning out there for 30 days at some juncture. So if we're going to identify corridors, and I think we probably would have multiple within the city that would, logistically and meet the legal requirements under our speeding and our traffic data crashes and stuff, identify those corridors all in one ordinance, because otherwise we'd have to come back to council each time to say, hey, this is a corridor, let's make a resolution for this corridor, and hey, this is a corridor, let's make a resolution for this corridor. I don't need any resolution for the areas that are defined, as I described earlier, a school zone, a residential neighborhood adjacent to a park, a maintenance area, right? As long as maintenance was being done in that zone. So I think the best practice would be to create an ordinance that identifies those locations throughout the city, and then do one giant notification, put the signs up 30 days, and then even if we use the mobile device in there, 45 days from now, we should be good at enforcement.
Okay, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Chief. Great presentation. A couple of questions as well. First, my statement is I'm not after a revenue for this project. It's more for public safety, first and foremost. Clarification for school zone. School zones are 20 miles per hour or less. This system is triggered at 10 miles per hour over. So how is that going to trigger? Is it going to trigger at 21 miles per hour? Because technically, in a school zone, you're in violation at 21 miles per hour.
You are. It will not trigger at 21. It's still under the statute, still
Okay.
requires the 10 mile an hour or over, unless it's a second offense or subsequent offense, right? And then, but it doubles the fine.
I understood that, but I was just wanting clarification on the speed. Trailer cost is the same as the fixed cost.
Correct.
Could you refresh my memory on the van cost again? Do you remember that?
The
off
vehicle
top of your head?
cost was much more expensive because they've got to,
was.
yeah, they've got to put a vehicle out there.
Yeah.
It was in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $40,000 for a vehicle
Yeah.
cost, because they outfit one vehicle, and you really can't move it from one vehicle to another. And we had those questions kind of brought forward in our
Yeah.
discussion with them. So, easier to move, I'd say,
Yeah, it
and maybe a
is.
little more covert. But this isn't about covert because
No, it
you
isn't.
have to post signs 300 feet. Everything's got to be
Exactly.
visible and easy enough to see. You may not recognize the car, you may not see the sign, but it sure wasn't a secret, right? It's all there. The trailer, I think it's a little more protected in the car. The trailer has maybe a little bit more opportunity for vandalism.
So that trailer would look like the one on Kersey Road type?
It could. They provided trailer information, but I don't know the one on Kersey. I don't know
Okay.
exactly what it looks like, but it would look a little bit like our speed trailers.
Okay.
That's probably the best example I could give to you. They're solar powered, battery operated. It's on a flatbed type trailer, and it would have a radar camera system attached to it.
Contract terms, I know you kind of alluded that you didn't know those terms, but is it a 1 year, 2 year? The reason why I asked that question is, could we front load, and I'm just a generalized question, could we potentially get 6 trailers, picking a random number, get 6 trailers, run it for 2 years, downgrade to 2? Have you seen any contractual agreements?
Yes, I have. We have a contract that they've sent us, right?
Okay.
And it's termed by. So the initial term request is a 5-year term, right? That's something we've got to negotiate, right? Because basically our charter tries to bring it to a 1-year term, right, as initial term. And then we can also use funding language that if council decides not to fund it, we can, have an escape clause out of the contract, right?
Yeah.
But they're. When we're talking about the equipment, of course, they want to try to recoup the cost of their maintenance and their work on the equipment. So we've got to negotiate that, and we'll be, if directed, we'll be working on that over the next, few weeks to try to get to that point, and then that contract would come back to council for approval. I think I'm not sure if it would meet the threshold actually, but so.
So they're asking
Meet
for
the
5.
requirements. They're asking for 5. That's their initial term. And then if you were to downsize, you would need to meet the parameters of, violating the contract, whatever that may mean. Like downsizing is one term of reducing the contract or getting out of the contract altogether. So you'd have to meet those terms. My initial suggestion last time, I think it's the same with this, is to start small, and then if we're happy and we feel that it's a successful program and it is proving to reduce speeds in our community and do the things we want it to do, then we can expand it either mobily or fixed locations, additional fixed locations within the community. I think it's much easier to expand the contract than it is going to be to reduce the contract over time.
And one last quick little question, that 1.6% was what again?
The 1.6% was the number of vehicles that were actually at 10 miles an hour or over in
Gotcha.
that data. So it's a very small percentage of the volume of traffic, right? It was 106,000 cars, right? It was 1.6% of that that were exceeding like 1,1500 in the 2-week period, right? Over a month, it's a little over 3,000, right? But 1.6% of the volume is at a dangerous speed. High risk. That's what we classify it as, high risk.
And quickly, in your professional opinion, you think 2 units will satisfy Evans to start with, or 3, 4, 5?
I think that I'm a little leery to the process by which we, what it's going to take manpower wise, every time I add a camera, it may be another 100 violations a day I got to look through and manage, right? From the police perspective with no additional resources, right? Every time we look at that, it's how many violations end up in Liz's courtroom that we've got to add additional resources to manage that process. So do we have enough speeding in Evans to put 4 or 5 cameras up in our hottest locations? Yes. Right? In our highest corridors? Absolutely. Can we potentially get the public safety reduction and risk assessment we're looking for with a couple? I think we probably could to start. And if we see that it's functioning and we can manage it, it's, I think, a lot easier to grow than to shrink.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. It's been great. A lot of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked, but I do agree with what your perspective of starting with 2 and then kind of expanding as we see what that looks like for the city and also for the police department and staff and everyone. Since a lot of the questions have been asked, for me, I just want to go, so I do agree with the 2, 1 fix and maybe potentially 1 mobile, because I think that would definitely satisfy some areas where we can move around in the city. But I wanted to focus on the adopted ordinance. I know that in the state of Colorado, you're strictly to use ABIS for like the traffic control component, but it doesn't necessarily state that it can be used for other things. And again, this is coming from like a public perception and stuff like that. So I know for me, if I would feel comfortable for the community, just to ensure that in the future, because granted, it's an adoption of an ordinance, and that can look different and also can be interpreted by other councils as well as other city managers in a different way. So I want to make sure that it says solely for these purposes, because that would indicate it's solely for traffic control X, Y, and Z, and nothing else. So that's what I would bring to this discussion, to add that word to just ensure for the future. And thank you for the presentation. I do agree with the public safety component and also ensuring that we provide communication to our community before implementation, just so the community is aware of the reasons why we're doing this. And again, it's because we've had a variety of different times where community members come and they're concerned because of playgrounds, schools, and their neighborhoods. People are going extremely fast. I mean, even at the park opening, we saw how many people were like not even stopping.
You and I
we were
sat there and counting them.
And so safety is a concern for our community, and the hopes is that this will definitely be a behavioral change and it will help reduce that. And so we're doing this for the community. So thank you.
I want to bring forward one piece of, I guess, caution to your initial ask. When council adopts whatever ordinance they do adopt, I want to make sure that we narrowly restrict the use to whatever you truly want to restrict the use to. Because I'd hate to have a homicide and a car flees in the direction of this camera, and then my department, my police officers, my detectives can't use the data that camera captures in an investigative process for something like that. So I think we just need to narrowly define when you want to restrict the use of it, just narrowly define it to what you want to restrict so that we don't lose some very valuable opportunities to solve other crimes within our community, seeing as how we're spending money on this technology that would be used in the community. But there are additional uses that it can be used for, and the major concerns, let's narrowly define them so that we can restrict them in those specific uses rather than like the broad brush where it just can't be used for anything.
And I think if you add for city purposes, I think that encompasses all city, you know what I mean? And then solely for city purposes X, Y, and Z. And I think that, the Evans PD will fall under that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, let's use that one. My mine's piggybacking off of Councilmember Johnson's point with privacy, because I also have had quite a few citizens come to me with concerns of their privacy. I understand we're all in public. I understand things get seen, but I don't run around saying, hey, my name's Tammy when I'm out in public. And so, you know, some people I think are thinking along those lines of, even though they're out in public, they still have some form of protection. Now, here's the thing, piggybacking off Councilmember Johnson's point, with these cameras, I understand they're going to capture things there that police may need, or, you know, whomever may need. Can we not make it to where they have to get a warrant to access those records? You know, I don't know how to say this correctly, but this way we know they're going about looking through the data legally for that information, and not just, oh, someone's looking through it because they're, not that they would, but, you know, looking through it because they're bored.
Sure.
That was one of the concerns I had brought to me, because police have to get, I think, a warrant to tap your phone or get things for your phone. So if they have to do it for that, why not have to get a warrant for the car information or whatever they're looking for?
So I sat through about a 6-hour hearing at the state level last week on this exact issue, right? And every DA in the state objected to that legislation the state passed. Every CML city in the state objected to that legislation the state passed. And virtually every law enforcement officer that testified objected to the legislation that passed, basically because the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to a non-privacy right that's on the public way. And there's no privacy right to the information of your license plate with regard to that. Could we put safeguards in place that's going to satisfy your concerns? Absolutely, I think we can do that, right? Requiring a warrant, I don't think is necessary. Setting policy that makes sure that our officers aren't using it in an inappropriate way. We're not sharing the data with agencies nationally or otherwise that could use it in a nefarious way, right? I think we can set those type of parameters in place that would make everybody comfortable with that regard. When we go beyond that and apply a Fourth Amendment restriction to something that doesn't require a Fourth Amendment restriction, it just makes it much, much more difficult and impedes actual officer investigation and process. So, but I do think that the concerns are warranted. They're, I think, easily addressed in other ways, maybe even legislatively within the ordinance to say we're going to use it for these purposes, right? And just make sure we don't broad brush it and it's just this narrow definition.
Well, thank you. That gives me an answer for them. And then the revenue from the tickets, would that be more than what we're bringing in now?
Showed it up earlier.
I didn't see what we're bringing in now. Did I miss that?
Oh, no, what we're bringing in now.
Okay, yeah, I was just asking if that would be a difference between what we're bringing in now.
I can tell you that my department doesn't write 45,000 citations a year.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so we write roughly, if I just had to give you an estimate, somewhere around 300 citations a month.
Okay.
Somewhere between 260 and 320, depending somewhere around there, right? Per month across the city. Now, our violations are much higher. The cost of those violations are much higher. And they're primarily moving type violations, so safety violations like speeding. But nonetheless, they're safety type violations, and the court process is managed a little differently, and some of those fees and fines and stuff goes into different pieces to that. But we can't do that under this ordinance. It's prohibited. It's a very strict ordinance on what we can collect, and it would be about $30 per citation. But volume and your overall behavioral reduction, I think, is where we get bang for our buck. It's not really in the actual fine. It's in the volume of the fines.
And then one last quick question. Which fund do we use to pay for this? Is it the general fund, or is it another fund that we'll use to pay for the program and then get, the ticket income?
That's a question probably best for Jackie, but I think you could use general fund.
It would be a general fund.
Thank you. I just need that clarification.
both had a comment you wanted to make. We have like 10 minutes left, so let me go up to Fred and Kyle next. So Councilmember Councilmember Neal.
Chief, would you happen to know if Longmont is using the multiple lane?
These are all multiple lane, so we could capture up to 3 lanes with the system that they've demonstrated for us. But again, it's one direction, right? So it's 3 lanes in one direction.
And it seems to me that nowadays the police are requesting or subpoenaing more camera footage if they think they may have caught footage of a crime being committed. So I'm sure we could incorporate that, some kind of language in there for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly requesting private surveillance video on, any serious crime in our community, so.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fair.
Yeah, thanks. Just one comment, as I do feel at least one mobile unit, which it sounds like everyone's supportive of, is essential. Like you're saying, from what I have seen in Greeley, I've passed those vans all over town, from First Avenue out to
I always
65th
wonder if
Avenue.
it's the same van. I wonder if it's the same van.
I think they have
They have
2.
3.
Okay, well, I've seen at least 2 of them, and I've got at least a couple of their tickets too. So they're quite effective. I will say the counter side of that is I would say that historically my whole life I've sped about 5 over speed limit. Now I pretty much feel like I can do 9 over pretty confidently, which I feel like that's kind of an adverse act of it. I'm not saying that I've started doing it because of it. Actually, the 2 tickets I got were right where it dropped from 30 to 25.
Just trying to
There's a
justify
van. And I think
driving 9 over.
I think that's probably a lot of what public upset is, or feeling like it's a speed trap, is it being set up somewhere right where the speed is reduced. So as long as these are well within the zone, I don't think that's necessarily an issue either. One other question I did have is here in the staff report, it said an automatic license plate reader was an add-on $300 per system per month cost. What is that?
So that's an ALPR technology. So that's more like the FLAC system. The difference is, though, that this, unless we had a FLAC system, we wouldn't add that on because it in itself doesn't automatically connect to the reading technology that would run that license plate and report to the police, the fact that the driver has a warrant or the fact that the car is stolen or any of those factors. So unless we had a FLAC system within the city, then that would be a well worth it add-on, right? Because it's just one additional camera in a location that would do the same technology that FLAC does. But unless and until we implement FLAC within the city, it doesn't benefit us to have an ALPR on that particular camera because it's not going to read. It'll read the camera, it'll read the plate. It's not going to send it to anywhere to tell us whether the car is stolen or if there's a warrant on the driver or if there is, a lookout, an Amber Alert on the car, any of those things, because it's not sending it to NCIC and CCIC to get that data back. So if we had a FLAC system within the city, it would integrate with the FLAC system, read it, send it to the FLAC system. The FLAC system would do the background work, and we would get alerts and get notifications of those things. So in this case, not necessary, but if we ever did utilize any type of ALPR technology, FLAC or any other, that was doing that live, then we could add those cameras on for what essentially is the same cost as a FLAC system camera, about $300 a month for that technology, which is excellent technology, but we just don't utilize it at this time.
Sure. Yep. Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
I wanted to mention the ALPR. I'm totally against FLOC, and the reason why, they provide information to federal agencies, especially when it comes to immigration information, which I'm totally highly against. And I think here, what we're trying to do is safety, not create safety concerns in the sense that people feel that can't live here because of some kind of system that we decided to implement within our city. But anyway, I wanted to ask questions in regards to the capabilities, because you did mention that it can capture 3 lanes, one direction.
I'm sorry, it can capture what?
Oh, it can capture 3 lanes, one direction, so it can take a picture. And so that means all vehicles, correct? So it can capture all, and then, so that's one of my questions, a multiple car vehicle. And also, what is the distance or the radius that it can capture speeding vehicles?
So it's designed to read the vehicle within a certain parameter of the camera. So as the vehicle approaches the camera, it's going to read the rear plate of the camera because that's the location that, even though Colorado requires both, right? It's going to read the rear. That's how they're designed. That's how they're set up. So it's going to capture it within, I want to say it's like 100 to 200 feet post camera. Well within whatever boundary we decide, we make sure that the camera's within the speed limit that we're looking for. And it'll capture that image in that time frame. And it'll capture the lanes of traffic, all lanes of traffic. So if there are 3 cars right next to each other, it'll delineate all 3 cars. It'll mark them and tell you this car was going this speed, this car was going that speed, this car was going that speed. It'll basically put a little box around it, show you that that's the plate we read, this is the car we read, this is where it was at. And this is the, so there is good, solid, clear identification of which vehicle, let's say 2 or 3 vehicles were traveling through the location at the same time or similar time.
Oh, awesome. And then another thing would be, the other question is, will it flash, like so people know, or is it just a silent
So
capture?
it does have infrared technology. It's not a red light camera, which is what most people indicate with like the flashing light when the red light camera indicates it. I don't believe there's a flash on every single incident. I think it's much more infrared, and it will read the speed of every car. It will only trigger to be noticed and reviewed if it exceeds the 10 miles an hour or over. So it'll read every car that goes through, but they won't get dispatched into this other queue for review and analysis and review by a human eye and AI to say this car was speeding unless it's reading it at 10 miles an hour or over.
Okay. And then the last thing that I have is just indicating thank you for really considering guardrails when it comes to when we adopt the ordinance. I think it's important, but also not to hinder the city business and ensuring that we're able to utilize the information internally. So I do appreciate that. And I say this just again because we're using the system solely for safety, for our community, traffic enforcement. So I want our community to know that's why we're doing what we're doing. So thank you.
Councilmember Neal.
Yes, Chief. The fixed cameras, they are capable of being moved, say, after 3 or 6 months in one location to another location.
So, yes, I'm sure there would be a cost associated with the movement of the equipment because the fixed cameras are pole mounted. They have cell service and they have Wi-Fi, and then they have not Wi-Fi. They have cell service and solar, so they're self-sustaining. But there would be a cost if we were to move it. Essentially, if we identify a location, they would want to stay at that location for a period of time. And if we wanted to move them, we could, but there would be a cost associated with that.
Could you bring that information back at the next council meeting?
Sure.
I'd appreciate it.
It'd be something, it'd be part of the contract, I think, so we would be able to present that.
Thank you.
All right, again, great presentation. Really glad that we got this taken care of. And again, as stated before, this is a strictly public safety thing. It's not a revenue generator for the city. So I appreciate it. All right, it's 6:58.